What? You're telling me this isn't a rave live?
Yeah, right? Longest minute in the world, right here. So I've read lots of Fanon, most of all of his books. Love Fanon. Read Wretched of the Earth, I've read Dying Colonialism, I've read Black Skins, White Mask, read On African Revolution. This book is my second time going around it. Yeah, I'm gonna read Dying Colonialism next. That one's called, psychology of oppression. No, psychology of oppression. So, I'm Fanon. Phenomenal. Racism, class, and hold on a second. I gotta turn on this light. I forgot. There we go. For socialism and meditations, it seems apparent that Weinrich has based her claims on the racialization of Fanon's thought on and yeah. So hold on. So we should look fully at both of these and then check them within the context of Wretched as a whole, i.e., look at all other references to the subject of race and racism, and class and socialism, seeking more complete and accurate picture of Fanon's view and his idea of key categories. This is Fanon. This world, oh, there's my first visual thing. Look at that. Hey, Sego. This world divided into compartments. This world cut into, is inhabited by two different species. The originality of the colonial context is that economic reality, inequality, and the immense differences of ways of life never come to mask the human realities. When you examine at close quarters the colonial context, it is evident that what parcels out the world is to begin with the fact of belonging to or not belonging to a given race or a given species. In the colonies, the economic superstructure is also a superstructure. The cause is the consequence. You are rich because you are white. You are white because you are rich. This is why Marxist analysis should always be slightly stretched every time we have to do with the colonial problem. Everything up to and including the very nature of pre-capitalist society, so well explained by Marx, must here be thought out again. The serfs is in essence different from the knight, but a reference to divine right is necessary to legitimize this stationary, right? Oh, statutory differences in the colonies. The foreigners coming from another country impose his rule by means of guns and machines. In defense of his successful transplantation, in spite of his appropriation, the settler still remains a foreigner. It is neither the act of owning factories, nor estates, nor a blank balance which distinguishes the governing classes. The governing race is first and foremost those who come from elsewhere, those who are unlike the original inhabitants, the others. As we reflect upon the first thing we should do is recall that Fanon's book opens the book on the theme of national liberation, national renaissance, and restoration of nationhood to the people. Nothing here implies that the colonized people are to be engaged in a race struggle or even a struggle for mere racial equality. If we can't sufficiently draw from the opening lines, then by the time we reach the fourth chapter, we should be able to see that colonized people struggle to regain or to reestablish their sovereignty through a struggle that, quote, aims at the fundamentally different sets of material social relations between people, in which is to result in the disappearance of the colonized people as a particular species. It is the struggle seeks a new humanity that's to be represented by the liberated people. It, quote, cannot be otherwise than define a new humanism, both for itself and for others. It is a prefigured in the objective and methods of the conflict. This is not a man holding race as a key category in colonial situation. We should also read within its proper context, that is, we should go back where Fanon tells us that we have to closely examine the systems of compartments into which the colonial world has been divided is part of that examination. Finally, we need to understand that we weren't examining mere structural relations, but the Manichaean ideology, that characteristic of both the colonized and the colonizer, prior to and during the decolonization process. Fanon is speaking in the voice of those who were still locked within the constraints of color, the people who at the beginning of the struggle continued to believe that race parcels out the world, are not the people who later developed the consciousness and the practical means that secure their sovereignty and facilitates their transformation into new people. For example, just take a quick look at relate the change undergone there in the people's consciousness to the voice. Here we go. Just making sure. I'm looking for another star. Okay, there's that. Okay. Taking these experiences as a starting point, the functioning of the main laws of economics were explained to the people with the concrete examples. The accumulation of capital ceases to be a theory and became a very real and immediate mode of behavior. The people understood how that once a man was in trade, he could be rich and increase his turnover. Then and then, only by the peasants tell the tale of how the grocer gave them loans at exorbitant interests, and others recall how he evicted them from their land, yes, and how from owners they become laborers. Yaki, what is the peasants who owned land? The more the people understand, the more watchful they become, and the more they come to realize that finally everything depends on them, and their salvation lies in their own cohesion, in the true understanding of their interests, and in knowing who are their enemies. During which the people maintain their adoption of the Manichaean ideology. The native replies to the living lie of the colonial situation by an equal falsehood. And here we go. I'm reading the star now. Hey, Two-Spirit. The problem of truth ought also be considered in every age among the people. Truth is the property of the national cause. No absolute verity, no discourse on the purity of the soul can shake this position. The native replies to the living lie of the colonial situation by equal falsehoods. His dealings with his fellow national are open. They are strained and incomprehensible with regards to the settlers. Truth is that which hurries on the breakup of the colonialist regime. It is that which promotes the emergence of the nation, the emergency of the nation. It is all the protects. It is all that protects the natives and ruins the foreigners. In this colonialist context, there is no truthful behavior and the good is quite simply that which is evil for them. Thus, we see that the primary Manichaeism, which governed colonial society, is preserved intact during the period of decolonization. That is to say that the settler never ceases to be the enemy, the opponent, the foe that must be overthrown. It is in this manner of thinking that each of the protagonists begins the struggle. To the saying, all natives are the same, colonized person replies, all settlers are the same. On the logical plane, the Manichaeism, which is black and white, of the settler produces a Manichaeism of the native. To the theory of the absolute evil of the native, and the theory of the absolute evil of the settler replies. I think it is significant that Fanon doesn't paint the Manichaean thinking with racial tones. But since the thinking of the colonial system is also racialized, any racial thought held by the colonized people constitutes an equal falsehood. When and how does the colonized people begin to abandon Manichaean thinking? It is precisely at the moment he realizes his humanity that he begins to sharpen the weapon with which he will secure its victory. The well-known principle that all people are equal will be illustrated in the colonies from the moment that the people claim that they are the equal of settlers. One step more, and they're ready to fight to be more than the settler. Thus, the colonized people discover that their lives, beating hearts, are the same as those of the settler. They find out that the settler's skin is not any more value than theirs, and it must be said that this discovery shakes the world in a very necessary manner. All the new revolutionary assurance of the colonized people stems from it. So they move from this black and white thinking, this oppressor, and they realize that they're just as better than the settlers, which puts the settler in a you're just a human position, and say you don't get to rule over me. And the AI says, analyzing Fanon's text on colonialism and the role of class. Go ahead, Dooley.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is something that I also hold as my political viewpoint, is that monsters, evil, and all of that, they're just things created by us. So we need to get rid of them as if they are creations and not some form of nature.
Naturalness. Yes. Thank you. Because the people only reflect the society that they are thrusted upon. And if we build a society based on us, then the society will lift us out of creating evilness, in a sense, or these monsters, as you say. The people discover after hard and costly experience that they suffered a very great weakness in the realm of knowledge, and that their consciousness has remained rudimentary. All these reactions signify that the dual world of the settler have had opposed their own duality. The recognition and reconstitution of the humanity of the peoples is the first step out of the Manichaean constraint of color or race, dualism in general. This represents an example of the superstructure influencing the base, as ideas grasped by the masses become the material forces. So the material forces are us, leading to motion to change the system. We are the motion and change, yes, of property relations, i.e., to overthrow colonialism, regain national sovereignty, and begin to build socialism. When the people begin to see themselves as the same as the settler, this allows them to begin to develop the struggle on the base of the truly key categories, i.e., IG, to be more than the settler, to move beyond the biologically based identity and set of interests, and to begin the development of society on the basis of economic and political need and interest. It's to understand that colonialism is fundamentally about the economic and political relations between those who are exploited and those who do not do the exploiting, even though race or racism is a component tool used in the process. All of this is a part of the reality that later discovers the help and helps lead to the shaping of a plan for freedom. The reality is that the struggle against racism is a necessary part of the struggle against colonialism, but the defeat of colonialism is a real object of the struggle. Our examination of and it consists should close with some reflection on the closing paragraph of Wretched, second chapter, which in themselves should be undermine should undermine any claim that Fanon saw race as a key category of colonial situation, or that he in any way characterized the colonization process as a race struggle. We've already seen Fanon raise the people's recognition of the very great weaknesses of their knowledge and the rudimentary character of their consciousness. This weakness was also spoken by Cabral, who again shows us continuity between his thought and that of Fanon. Cabral developed the seed of Fanon's by elaborating upon the character of the weakness as one which failed to examine the class structure of the colonized society and the primacy of the economic base. Fanon writes, racial feelings as opposed to racial prejudice, and that determination to fight for one's life which characterizes the natives' reply to oppression are obviously good enough reasons for the joining up in the fight. But you do not carry on the war in order to make racialism or hatred triumph. Racialism and hatred and resentment cannot sustain a war of liberation. The intense emotion of the first few hours falls to pieces if it is left to feed on its own substance. Hatred alone cannot draw up a program. You will only risk the defeat of your own ends if you depend on the enemy to widen the gap and to throw the whole of the people on the side of the rebellion. Note the distinctions between racial feelings and racial prejudice. The use of the former term is a bit unlike its use at where race feels in its most exuberant or exacerbated form is triumphing and becoming racial prejudice. In this instance, racial feelings can at one level be compared to the kind of national consciousness, a kind of group of collective identity which hasn't yet reached its full potential. Or it can be compared to, quote, the hollow shell of nationality itself, a necessary but insignificant step in the process of becoming the new people. The war can't feed on the mere substance of racial feelings. Much more than this is needed to develop a program, i.e., one that will free the people, politically and socially. There must be an economic program. There must also be a doctrine concerning the division of wealth and social relations. In fact, there must be an ideal of humanity and of the future of humanity. Further shows how paragraph 2-63 further shows how, let me just make sure, okay, there it is. Reliance on the mere racial feeling allows colonialism to later more easily disarm the people with kindlessness and with reforms that include them into the colonial framework, which it through a assimilationist agenda, focusing on ideologically upon the masses and programmatically on the elite and the creation of the natives middle class. All right, let's go up to read the thing. The native is so starved of anything that at all that will turn him into human being, any bone of humanity flung to him, that his hunger is incorrigible, and these poor scraps of charity may here or there overwhelm him. His consciousness is so precarious and dim that it is affected by the slightest spark of kindness. I think it's kindness. The native may, at any moment, let himself be disarmed by some concession or another. Genuine revolutionary leadership sees the need to reassess the and to politically educate the people, focus on underlying causes of colonialism and the economic objectives and the protracted nature of the struggle. And let's read some more. This struggle of national liberation does not consist in spanning the gap in one stride. The drama has to be played out in all its difficulty every day, and the suffering engendered far outmeasures any enduring during the colonial period. Down to the towns, the settlers seem to have changed. Our people are happier. They are respected. Day after day goes by. They must not imagine that the end is already won. When the real objective of the fight are shown to them, they must not think that they are impossible to obtain. Once again, things must be explained to them. People must see where they are going and how they are going to get there. The war is not a single battle, but rather a series of local engagements. And to tell the truth, none of these are decisive. Interesting. Continuing to challenge the Manichaean categorization of entire groups through the dualist lens. In this instance, those people living in the towns, Fanon urges insight that certain fractions of the population have particular interests and that these do not always coincide with the national interests. The people will thus come to understand that national independence sheds light upon many facts which are sometimes divergent and antagonistic. Such a taking stock of the situation at this precise moment of the struggle is decisive, for it allows the people to pass from total discriminating nationalism to social and economic awareness. People who at the beginning at the struggle had adopted the primitive Manichaeanism of the settlers, black people and white people, Arabs and Christians, realize that they go along that it sometimes happens that you get black people who are whiter than the whites, and that the fact of having a national flag and a hope of an independent nation does not always tempt certain stratas of the population to give their interests or privileges, to give up their interests or privileges. The militant who faces the colonialist war machine realizes that while he is breaking down the colonial oppression, he is building up automatically yet another system of exploitation. This discovery is unpleasant, bitter, and sickening. And yet everything seems to be so simple before. The bad people were on one side and the good on the other. The clear, unreal, idyllic light of the beginning is followed by a semi-darkness that bewilders the senses. The people find out that the inequitous I'm going to look up this word, everybody. Thanks for reposting. Appreciate that. Analyzing Fanon's view says, analyzing Fanon's view and class struggle. Share. I'm going to look up this word, everybody, because I don't think I'm saying it right. Oh my gosh. Don't do this. I did this. This. INIQUIT Please say it. Please let me say it. No! Nope. Let me do that. There we go. Maybe this will let me do it.
Iniquitous.
Yeah, iniquitous. I was right. Iniquitous. Fact of exploitation. Can wear a black face or an Arab one, and they raise the cry of treason. But the treason of is not national. It is social. The people must be taught to stop, to cry, stop thief. In this first half of the paragraph, the focus is on the need of the people to pass from narrow nationalism, i.e., that which represents a race, to social and economic awareness. Ask yourself this, though. How exactly do you get black people who are whiter than the whites? I mean, do the black people change their color of their skin? If not, then being white refers to something more other than skin color, doesn't it? Maybe it has something to do with the kinds of interests and privileges that certain stratas of the population don't want to give up. How did Fanon put it? Quote, the iniquitous fact of exploitation can wear a black face. Let's continue with the paragraph. Here we go. In their weary roads towards national knowledge, the people must also give up their too simple conceptions of their overlords. The species is breaking up under their very eyes. As they look around them, they notice that certain settlers do not join in the general guilty wildness. There are differences in the same species. Such men who before were included without distinction and indiscriminately in the monolithic mass of the foreigners' presence actually go so far as to condemn the colonial war. The scandal explodes when the prototypes of this division of the species go over to the enemy, become, they use the N word for black, or Arabs, and accept suffering, torture, and death. Reflect on this meaning of the two simple conceptions of their overlords, that the people must give up, i.e., to consider all in merely racial terms, is surely at the heart of it. But it's more, even when moving beyond race to the socio-economic and political, the people see, quote, the species is breaking up under the very eyes, and we notice differences within the same species. Just as earlier, we had to reconfigure the images of black people and whites now. We have to figure out what it means when the settler becomes, quote, black people, what they use the N-words, or Arabs. The difference within the species, that is both species, colonizers and colonized, or colonizer and colonizer, are marked by forms of thought and practice. Worldviews stands thus. The people see that the settler is not simply the man that must be killed. Many members of the mass of colonialists reveal themselves to be much, much nearer to the national struggle than certain sons and daughters of the nation. The barriers of blood and race prejudice are broken down on both sides. In the same way, not every black person or Muslim is issued automatically with the hallmark of genuineness. Consciousness solely dawns upon truths that are only partial, limited, and unstable. As we may surmise, all this is very difficult. Let's look at a few key phrases starting with Fanon's use of the term species, and the note Weinrich omissions of the term in her quotes. And here's her quote. I think this is her quote. I'm not sure. This world is divided into compartments. This world cut in two is inhabited by two different species. The originality and the colonial context is that economic reality. Unequality and the immense differences of ways of life never come to mask the human realities. When you examine at close quarters the colonial context of this evident that what parcels out the world is to begin with the facts of belonging to or not belonging to a given race, a given species. In the colonies, the economic superstructure is also the superstructure. Ugh. The cause is the consequence. You are rich because you are white. You are white because you are rich. This is why Marxist analysis should always be slightly stretched every time we have to do with the socio-political term, not a biological one, and refers to groups of individuals having common interest. However, the term can be used to refer to racial categories, but only within the Manichaean framework. Taking Wretched as a whole, i.g., his use of the term, I contend that Fanon used not only the term species, but also the term race to refer to socio-political groups and not biologically distinguishable groups. I think Sartre also used the term breed in a sociological sense, there with reference to the coherent process of struggle and the simultaneous creation of a new people, of a particular interest. There is his reference to the settler as part of a dialectic. Once the last settler as species is killed, shipped home, or assimilated, the minority breed disappears to be replaced by socialism. The term breed species within the context is being replaced by socialism. We are talking about socio-political and economic structures, social relations, and social being, not biology or genetics. Now shift to the phrase, quote, the originality of the colonial context is the economic reality, inequality, and the immense differences of the ways of life never come to mask the human realities. I recall the originality of the colonial situation first discussed, where Fanon talks about the two forces being opposed to each other. There, the originality seems to refer to their existence together. That is to say, the exploitation of the native by the settler. At bottom of the originality, the colonial setting is an economic contradiction between two socially heterogeneous groups, and the economic base is masked by race. The human realities are the results of the racialization of capitalist colonialist oppression and exploitation, and all that colonialism use of race brings to the setting through its employment of Manichaean ideology and the compartments that divide the settings of all spheres. These human realities are never masked because race appears as external to the economic relations and predominant, i.e., as cause. In the colonies, the economic substructure is also the superstructure. The cause is the consequences. You are rich because you are white. You are white because you're rich. We're repeating. The base is also a superstructure because race makes the cause, economic relations, appear as a consequence of whiteness, while being rich or the appropriation of a colonial of the colonies wealth appears as a consequence of this same whiteness. Fanon is here stretching the analysis, emphasizing the peculiar operations of base and superstructures under colonialism, as we've seen the economic contradictions of the base manifest themselves on the level of the superstructure. In turn, the superstructure expresses and serves the base and also influences the base. In this instance, the pattern of ownership and the production relations of the base appears as a race relation and manifests through the human realities of racial discrimination and equality throughout the societies, throughout all the superstructural phenomenon, ideas, institutions, organizations, state apparatus, etc. Racism is what's out front, works as a shadow. We're constantly screaming about the injustice of racism and the need to combat racism, while neglecting the material reality that produces this shadow, in which it serves and masks. Let's leave on this note Fanon ain't saying that race is the key category of colonial situation. At most, he's saying that race is one of the keys to understanding how the economic base is masked, and that it is a component of colonialism. This points towards the need to stretch socialist analysis in this instance so that we come to understand the relations of race to class, the role of race in colonial oppression, the exploitation. It's on this basis that he points to the question of legitimacy, i.e., how the superstructure performs the function of legitimizing colonialism with the use of race. Again, there's really no race structure, but a class structure that's being racialized. With regards to paragraph 1, I don't know, it's precisely because of the dialectical relationship between the base and the superstructure in the colonial setting, whereas the idea of race plays a key role, that Fanon says that must stretch Marx's analysis. He clearly states why he draws up the image of race in colonial settings. Fanon's points out that the reference to divine rights is necessary to legitimize the statutory differences between the serfs and the knight. By statutory, he refers us to this superstructure and its roles of rationalizing not mere differences, but the economic reality, the inequality, and the immense differences in ways of life that results from the oppressive and exploitive classes, positions of knight and serf, or colonized and colonizer. Divine rights is used to legitimize the oppression of the serf. What's used to legitimize the oppression of the colonized? What is that difference that distinguishes the governing classes in the colonial situation? Race? Well, yes and no. On one hand, it's first and foremost the fact that the colonialists are those who come from elsewhere. However, on the other hand, it is the fact that they own which underneath the shadow of race does in fact distinguish those who rule from those who are subject to colonial exploitation. Yes, the colonialists use guns and machines, but why? For what purpose? The fundamental differences between situations of the serf and that of the colonized is that the former was exploited by a ruling class that wasn't foreign. The commonality between the serfs and the colonized is that both were targets of the superstructural weapon used to make their oppression appear normal or natural, legitimizing through legal oh my gosh, I already forgot the words. Statutory, right? Means or ideas alleging biological differences. Making sure. I'm going to look back real quick, just make sure no one is saying anything. Damn, this is hard to watch. Well, you don't have to watch. Let's now return to consider Weinreich's distortion by omission that I spoke of above, as she quoted Fanon while claiming that he believed base and superstructure to collapse altogether in the colonial situation. Weinreich's lines in question is, Here's her question, I think. In order to promote a genuine eradication of the superstructure built by the bourgeois colonial environment, Fanon turns his attention to the native intellectual and the problems of national culture. What Fanon actually says is, in the colonial countries where a real struggle for freedom has taken place, where the blood of the people has flown, and where the length of the period of the armed warfare has favored the backward surge of intellectuals towards bases grounded in the people, we can observe a genuine eradication of the superstructure built by these intellectuals from the bourgeoisie colonialist environment. On one hand, the mere omission of the words these intellectuals changed Fanon's context and meaning, while also arising questions about Weinreich's aim and interest. On the other hand, we can see that the entire quote line is taken out of context, and I'd say deliberately so. Even though we can say in a broader sense that Fanon is talking about the destruction of the superstructure created by colonialism, that's really not the concern that he's voicing in this paragraph. As they say, the subject in this paragraph is intellectuals. The backward surge of the colonized intellectual towards bases grounded in the people. The subject is the class suicide, the colonized intellectual, and the responsibility that they share in creating and reinforcing superstructural phenomena native to colonialism, the bourgeoisie's worldview. That is, we can read that the paragraph to understand that it's not only the superstructural phenomenon, but the colonized intellectuals too that are from the bourgeois colonialist environment. Those intellectuals who, we must recall, masked the phenomenon of the mocking and the vomiting of Western values by the masses, and who followed the colonialists with regard to the universal abstract. And this permeated by colonialism and all its ways of thinking. It is the colonized intellectuals who bring vibrant to the petition of the people that the last shall be first. The context that Fanon sets is that within which Wretched should read in paragraph, which we're going to read right now. Okay. The colonialist bourgeoisie, in its narcissistic dialogue, expounded by the members of its universities, had in fact deeply implanted in the minds of the colonized intellectuals that the essential qualities remain internal in spite of all the blunders men may make. The essential values of the West, of course. The native intellectual accepted the cogence of these ideas, and deep down in his brain you could always find a vigilant sentinel already to defend the Greco-Latin pedestal. Now it so happens that during the struggle for liberation, at the moment that the native intellectual comes into touch again with his people, this artificial sentinel is turned to dust. All the Mediterranean values, the triumph of the human individual, of clarity and of beauty, becomes lifeless, colorless, knickknacks. All those speeches seem like collections of dead words. Those values which seem to uplift the soul are revealed as worthless simply because they have nothing to do with the concrete conflict in which the people engage. Where was I at? There was a little thing. Where was it at? There it is. Found it. The focus is upon the colonized intellectuals within whom, quote, we find intact in the theme and in them the manner of and forms of thought picked up during their association with the colonialist bourgeoisie. In order to assimilate and to experience the oppressor culture, the native has had to leave certain of his intellectual possessions in pawn These pledges include his adoption of the forms of thoughts of the colonialist bourgeoisie. So they just repeated it. Okay, now some of these intellectuals will commit class suicide, but most of them will not. And they'll become the spoiled children of yesterday's colonialism and today's national governments to organize the loot of whatever national resources exist. It's precisely the process of class suicide that Fanon refers to. And below that stands as a condition for the genuine eradication of the superstructure built by these intellectuals. Therefore, we see some of the process of the eradication as individualism is the first to disappear as they engage in people's democracy and communal self-criticism. Now following Weinrichs, when Fanon, quote, turns his attention to native intellectuals, it is for the explicit purpose for examining class structure and class struggle within the colonized nation. But our focus will be on those references to race and its use by the bourgeois forces, since this example gives us evidence why Weinrich wants to promote the primacy of race over class, while grossly over the responsibility of the colonized bourgeois forces in diverting the emergencies of and confusing the minds of the people. As Weinrich tries to hide this responsibility, Fanon exposes it. The bourgeois forces want to use racism for essentially the same reason and in the same manner as the colonialists, to prevent the development of economic and political awareness among the masses, hindered the rise of revolutionary consciousness, and prevents the people from taking the path of socialism. Let's venture into the third chapter of Wretched to see what we see. What is it? Unpreparedness, low energy, which they use laziness, cowardice, and a lack of practical links between them and the masses of the people that leads to tragic mishaps in the course of struggle caused by the actions or inactions of the colonized bourgeois forces. History teaches us clearly that the battle against colonialism does not run straight away along the lines of nationalism. For a very long time, the native devotes his energies to ending certain definite abuses, forced labor, corporate punishment, inequality of salaries, limitations of political rights, etc. This fight for democracy against the oppression of mankind will slowly leave the confusion of neoliberal universalism to emerge, sometimes laboriously, as a claim to nationhood. It so happens that the unpreparedness of the educated classes, the lack of practical links between them and the mass of the people, their laziness, and left it be said, their cowardice at the decisive moment of the struggle will give rise to tragic mishaps. Okay, national consciousness will be in any case only an empty shell, a crude and fragile travesty of what it might have been. The faults we find in it are quite sufficient explanations in the facility with which the nation is passed over for the race and the tribe is preferred to the state. Such retrograde steps are the historical results of the incapacity of the national middle class to rationalize popular action. That is to say, their incapacity to see into the reasons for what actions. This traditional weakness is not solely the result of the mutilation of the colonized people by the colonial regime. It is also the result of the intellectual laziness of the national middle class, of its spiritual penury, and of the profoundly cosmopolitan mold that that its mind is set in. The nature of the colonized middle class is bourgeoisie, and it's the tool of capitalism. It has no progressive economic program and no idea as to how to form the people's state. In fact, it simply refuses to follow the path of revolution. Yet the national middle class constantly demands the nationalization of the economy and of the trading sectors. This is because, from their point of view, nationalization does not mean placing the whole economy at the service of the nation and deciding to satisfy the needs of the nation. For them, nationalization doesn't mean governing the state with regards to a new social relations. To them, nationalization quite simply means the transfer into native hands of those unfair advantages which are a legacy of the colonial period. The native bourgeoisie, which comes to power, used its class aggressiveness to corner the positions formerly kept for the foreigners. It waves aloft the notion of the nationalization and Africanization of the ruling classes. The fact is that such action will become more and more tinging by racism. The working class of the towns, the masses of unemployed, the small artisans and craftsmen, for their part line up behind the nationalist attitude. But in all justice, let it be said, they only follow in the steps of their bourgeoisie. If the national bourgeoisie goes into competition with the Europeans, the artisans and the craftsmen start a fight against non-national Africans. From nationalism, we have passed to ultranationalism, to chauvinism, and finally to racism. Summing up, we can read chapter 3 in this instance as an examination of class use of race, about the class struggle that must take place among the people if genuine national independence is to occur. I'd hope that we can read this chapter in particular with regards to our own struggle and the lead giving us by the bourgeois forces in our midst, who also use Africanization as a cloak for their aim to dominate as a class in alliance with their capitalist masters. Fanon gives some advice on the means to be used to prevent neocolonialism situation. The bourgeoisie should not be allowed to find the conditions for its existence and its growth. In other words, the combined efforts of the masses led by the party and of the intellectuals who are highly conscious and armed with revolutionary principles ought to bar the way of this useless and harmful middle class. Care should be taken to distinguish the mass of the intellectuals or the class of bourgeois and petty bourgeois forces from those who have committed class suicide. Not all intellectuals are highly conscious, and not all petty bourgeois or pseudo-bourgeois forces are armed with revolutionary principle. Most of all, Fanon is not saying that it's even the revolutionary petty bourgeois intellectuals that lead. It's the masses that are to be led by a party. In principle, their party, which they combine with the efforts of those intellectuals that are highly conscious and armed with revolutionary principles, those who have returned to the source and have been reborn. Fanon says of the latter, we must know how to use these people in a decisive battle while closing the road to the bourgeois forces. Before we move on to the next session, do you have anything to say? Anything you'd like to add, Doodley? If you're there.
Yeah. All I want to say is that just because someone is inside of the class or identity that benefits from the system does not mean that they cannot change
Yep.
It just means that they are more likely to follow the footsteps of others in that identity or class group.
To stay connected with the bourgeoisie in a sense, and to utilize bourgeois philosophy and perceptions. Yeah, to give this false indication of national liberation when they talked about, like, if it's not a path to socialism, then it's a path to chauvinism and stuff like that. So yeah, um, that's why like, he mentions that the character they have to take on is a type of class suicide to immerse themselves back in connections with the natives and the people and the masses. Yep. Next section. Thoughts on deconstruction of race. In the modern world, the race struggle has become part of the class struggle. It is only the ending of capitalism, colonialism and imperialism, and neocolonialism, and the attainment of world communism that can provide the conditions under which the race question can finally be abolished and eliminated. What I've been saying a lot lately, Doodley? If we want to eradicate the concept and construct of whiteness, we have to do what? Have to do a revolution. It seems right to choose a planting. It seems right to close by planting seeds that should help to develop the process of deconstruction of race as a concept, and the elimination of race as a form of thought and practice. Bouncing off Nkrumah, the race struggle is the struggle to disauthenticate the concept of race, upon which the practice of racism is a tool of capitalism. As a tool of capitalism stands. However, we must perceive and manage this process as one component of the larger battle to overthrow capitalism and to build socialism. That is, the race struggle is part of the struggle between oppressed and oppressing classes, and or national classes, because racism disguises the material reality upon which capitalist exploitation is based, and promotes the view that the tool racism is the cause. My position has been that Fanon regarded race and racism as significant obstacles in the path of true freedom, that he saw race as a shadow that derived its substance from the stability and operations of the base. As the base was attacked, as the people waged the national class struggle on the political and economic fronts, the base lost stability, and the shadow began to fade, and lost its ability to confuse and divert energies. The third chapter of Wretched provides the best example as we see that racialized thought and practice of the bourgeois forces uprooted as a result of the people's effort to politically overthrow and negate the powers of the bourgeoisie forces. It's through its process that the people assumed control over all the material means required to build and safeguard their new social order. Thus, we're required to build and safeguard. Thus, we're provided that with the guides to our own actions and development, the primary component of our process of deconstruction of the race and racism. That is, the process is part of the national class struggle, a struggle that unfolds in all social spheres, and which has three major forms: ideological, political, and economic. The national class struggle is a motive force for social development. In this case, meaning it aims to change the relations of production and the pattern of ownership of the means of production, which in turn becomes the condition for corresponding changes in the superstructure, i.e., to free the process of development of the productive forces, people, and usher the creation of an all-around environment in which race as a concept is eliminated and the thought and practice of racism is uprooted. What did I say? What did I just say? The battle against racism must be waged by fighting the battle in isolation from the other forms of national class struggle will be inefficient. Fighting racism alone won't end racism any more than directing blows at the shadow will eliminate that shadow. However, This is not to say that the battle against racism is not necessary. The deconstruction of the concept of race and the battle against racist thought and practice are pivotal to the revolutionary process. Pro-capitalist and anti-socialist forces have historically relied on the shadow of race, racial thought and practice to undermine class, national revolutionary struggles. The very idea of race has to be sufficiently dismantled so that people can more easily overcome its appeal. We're going to move on to Mao Zedong. Do you have anything before we move to Mao Zedong? I know he just got you to say something. If you don't, it's good school too. Okay, let's go ahead and continue. Mao Zedong. For example, if racial identity is a form of collective mental illness, then we need to engage whatever psychological means necessary to effect a cure. If racism is a bad idea, then we need to focus attention on the source of origin and the means of its reproduction, so that we can change it with a correct idea. Where do correct ideas come from? Do they drop Do they drop? Wait. Did I read that? Yeah. Do they drop from the sky? No. They are innate in the minds. No, they come from social practice and from it alone. They come from three kinds of social practice: the struggle for production, the class struggle, and the scientific experiment. It is man's social being that determines his thinking. Once the correct ideas, characteristics of the advanced class are grasped by the masses, these ideas turn into a material force which changes society and changes the world. That was Mao, by the way. All right, let's see what the AI says here now. It says, deconstructing concepts of race and racism as part of class struggle. Sweet. In short, we gotta engage the battle of on the ideological front, using whatever superstructural elements necessary and applicable. But we also have to combine the efforts of the ideological front with the efforts of the political, which is also superstructural, and economic fronts in a comprehensive campaign to change people, society, and the world. That racism is an ideology and not a scientific theory should be obvious to most people today. Virtually all attempts at scientific classification of race and racial characteristics have ended in failure. This is because race is not a concept that arose from scientific investigation. Rather, it developed historically among whites as a social idea to explain the inferior status assigned to non-whites. Thus, when we discuss racism, we are dealing with a set of social ideas that reflect established social relations. If we want to know how these social relations originally came to be established, we must look beyond the ideology. Once race began developing as an ideology, however, there was no lack of scientific experts who sought to lay upon it the mantle of scientific objectivity. Many scholars have abandoned the use of the concept of race as a way to categorizing people. Skin color and other physical features do not reveal much more than genetic makeup of an individual or group. Two individuals with the same skin color and hair texture may be more genetically different from one another than they are from two persons with another pigmentation. For this reason, scholars have concluded that African and other people as well are so internally different that the old way of classifying people according to physical appearance or race is no longer useful. Part of the battle on the ideological front involves, as Allen implies, pulling the pseudoscientific veneer off the concept of race and the ideology of racism. However, as we read Allen's words, we also see another aspect of the ideological battle, the elimination of racial language, which involves calling it to question whatever and whatever, whenever and whatever, wherever they come across it, and the need to develop and promote language that truly reflects the reality of capitalist hegemony and exploitation and the revolutionary interests and vision of the people. Pulling off the pseudoscientific veneer goes to the heart of the race. So like that's the whole thing. That's why people need to learn about race so they know how to like destroy it within themselves and to not allow it to exist around them, you know? But like if we have the cap, so that's why it's two. That's why it's intertwined with class, because capitalists and the bourgeoisie have intertwined it on purpose to again shield what the trueness. Pulling off the pseudoscientific veneer goes to the heart of race, being the social construction, i.e., that is not only scientifically derived and is a fictitious categorization of peoples having no existence, no reality, apart from the subjective interpretation of perceived distinctions. Not only must we expose race as an imagined categorization, we must also promote a genuine scientific knowledge on the origins and diversity of a single human species. That is, for example, a human skin color and other physical features, physical and physiological differences between groups of people are results of adaptation to the environment amount of sun in the case of skin color, the socioeconomic factors as migrations from an African-centered resulted in a number of isolated populations existing in a variety of climatic and environmental conditions. Note the works of Dr. Rebecca Cohen showing that the first Eve, a woman in Africa living over 150,000 years ago, is a genetic mother of all humans. Slavery is nearly as old as human civilization itself. But when the Generatia Maria, earliest slave ships ever recovered, first landed in Barbados on July 9th, 1698, with 250 Africans aboard, the construct of race was hardly formulated. The African slave trade was sustained by profit-hungry elites of all kinds: Christians, Muslims, Jewish people, Europeans, Arabic, Africans, and Americans. Yet, the distinctive features of New World slavery was its racial character. After a few decades of transracial slavery, in which whites, black people, and indigenous were owned by whites, an ancient form of subjugation became the exclusively black and white affair. This racialization of American slavery was rooted in economic calculations and psychological, what's that word? Anxieties. Wait, no, that's not anxieties. Is that anxieties? Not anxieties. What is that? Let's go look at this word. I don't know what it is. How are we doing on time? We're doing good. ANXIET.
Anxieties.
Yeah, that's right. Anxieties that targeted black bodies. In fact, the human family was carved into modern racial pigeonholes. White, black, they used the color for indigenous people, brown, and they used the color for Asian people in order to control, confine, discipline, and dishonor Africans. Racialized persons and racist practice were systemized and canonized, principally owing to the financial interest and psychic need that sustained the slave trade and the New World slavery. Take Allen and West together on a theme of racial languages. With Allen, even while telling us that race is an unscientific social construction, he reinforces the reality of race by continuing to the convenient use of the phrase such as classification of race. Here he could have said peoples of AS race, and racial characteristics, whites and non-whites, rather than naming specific peoples, e.g., Spanish, Ashanti, etc. With West, he tells us that the construct of race was hardly formulated in 1968, yet he, too, reinforces its reality through the same persistent use of first the phrase transracial slavery and then using the invented categories whites, black people, and the color for indigenous people in exclusively black and white affair, black bodies, remaining embedded in racialized thought is largely the result of failing to follow the logic of one's analysis. That is, if you analyze the historical situation and see that race is the fabrication, have the courage and political revolutionary morality to follow the logic of the analysis and became consistent in your use of language, the theory and practical practice, political practice. If I truly believe that race is a function, I can't reasonably string together words like virtually all attempts at scientific classification of races and racial characteristics have ended in failure. Why, of course, they have. Therefore, the sentence should read, say, virtually all attempts to classify the various human groups of races and to term their physical indifferences of racial have ended in failure, rather than saying after a few decades of transracial slavery in which whites, black people, and people of color, which they say indigenous people of the color, were owned by whites. This ancient form of subjugation became the exclusively white and black affair. Why not say something like decades of New World slavery in which peoples of Europe, Africa, and the native inhabitants of the New World were colonized by peoples of Europe, and it became exclusively a European and African, a European, a Euro-American, and a new African affair. Making the effort to use more appropriate language forces us to engage in the creation of a more accurate picture of historical and contemporary realities, while also giving shape to the new vision and the articulation of the revolutionary interests of the people. The struggle to uproot old bad bourgeoisie ideas promotes new socialist and humanist ones in the process. As Wretched opens, Fanon tells us that decolonization influences individuals and modifies them fundamentally, and that it's introduced by new people, and with it a new language and a new humanity. The decolonization of race as a concept and the struggle against racism on the political front starts by understanding politics as everything related to our lives, and not just those things related to the electoral arena. More precisely, we can define politics as a concentrated expression of economics concerned with the acquisition, retention, and use of state power, which is used to realize revolutionary interests of society. Politically, the deconstruction of race attacks the cause and seeks to prevent the use of race to distinguish it. And I got another. This is only my second one. That's pretty bad. That's pretty good. It's only my second one, guys. Everybody. For example, the struggle against racial profiling ain't a mere struggle against racism, but one against one, colonial aggression, and two, capitalist exploitation under the guise of racial discrimination. In such instances where we combat racial profiling, slogans should always be raised that target the capitalist body, which projects the racial shadow. Economic struggle against racist practice and the deconstruction of race must also be connected with the battle against the body and not be confused and diverted by the shadow. For example, racial discrimination in housing, wages, in employment, healthcare, etc. should all be placed within the context of national class oppression and exploitation, its inequalities, expressing and reinforcing economic exploitation and political domination of oppressed nationalities and classes to sustain capitalism as fundamental expression of capitalism and not mere racism, perceived as external to capitalism. Bottom line, anyone claim to attack racism while claiming that racism is the only thing wrong with the system is either terribly confused or an outright enemy of the people and their interest. If we truly want to get rid of racism, we have to overthrow capitalism first. We need the new language developed on the ideological front is used in the political and economic fields to name the enemy and define the reality, to identify the interests and goals of the people. The language of the bourgeois forces sees classes and nations as races and seeks to confine our struggle within racial boundaries, i.g., for a kind of racial equality within capitalist order. That we haven't made more racial progress for the masses people as a whole is no wonder. Into part 3. Where are we at? 15 minutes? Let me look ahead. I'll read this one part. Reminder. Yaki finished part 1, 2, and 3 of Meditations, but part 4 was never complete. Part 4 started out as a rough first draft, where trial wordings are mixed with notes to himself to add this or say that. Often such notes to him are marked by special brackets. They'll show it. Soon enough, it is mostly notes and possible quotes to be used. This chapter is choppy and fragmentary, but still roughly completes an arc. The project part 5 and 6 that Yaki came to think were necessary never, as far as the editor knows, saw paper or were even in outline form. His cancer came on too rapidly and lethally for that. We will have to work without these. So this is going to be a little fragmented. All right, everybody? But still, they tell us it's worth reading. You look ahead real quick. I think since this is the last thing, we might have to stop a little early today because I don't want to keep going. Okay. So on part 4, on the restoration of nationhood, the constitution of revolutionary nationalist consciousness, and the socialist humanist objective, we're going to read about point of departure, or in case you missed it, and then the nation, the people's state, the national culture. 1, the nation is. 2, the nation and the people's state, according to Fanon. 3, cultural, national, revolutionary. I don't know if 6 is there, but they have it. The misadventures of national and class consciousness, national consciousness, bourgeoisie, revolutionary nationalism, class consciousness, bourgeoisie, proletarian socialist, the taking on new skin and reparations, new skin and socialist humanism, afterwards reparations, self-reliance, and delinking. Those are what we're going to go over. All right, I think I'm going to, no. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop here. All right, Doodly, anybody, welcome to come up, have a conversation, talk about it. It's ending a little early, but it'll be all right.
I apologize for not interacting throughout the thing. I'm having to help take care of my mom.
It's all right.
Okay, so yeah, basically we need to stop trying to act as if this system is inherent, is what I'm getting from it, and we need to actually see people as people, whether they're bad or good people. Because at the end of the day, change isn't going to happen if we keep being dogmatic, and we need to actually cause change.
That the Rainbow Coalition needs to be a thing again. It needs to be a national thing. You know what I mean? It needs to be a national thing. Because of these things. Because like the book says, we can do two things at once. We can do the class struggle with the race struggle, because he says that because they're capitalists and everybody, they have interwoven class relations with racial relations too. So it's through the superstructure and impacting the economic base, the material base. So the material base is usually like the workers, the people that are in charge, that like the workers, the bourgeoisie, that's the material base, the people that produce and make things, you know? So yeah, and that's affected by the superstructure. So like, and the changing in a humanistic thing, with natives seeing themselves as not lower than the settler too, and developing into that. So that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I feel like when people give in to these ideas of philosophies being like higher truths rather than like tools.
The higher truth is the
If
practicality of the philosophy. If it computes
yes,
to reality, that's the higher
yeah,
input of it.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like a philosophy is not a higher truth; it's a tool, and the higher truth comes from the circumstances.
It comes from the practical use and putting it into play. Yeah.
Yes,
The implementation of it.
yeah,
And the
because
implementation of capitalism, imperialism, neocolonialism, and racism is the function that suits and upholds the ruling class. That's the function of it. The superstructure maintains and upholds their state, and the economic base maintains their power within the material base too. So yeah,
yeah,
they utilize all these functions in a way to keep us shadowboxing and not getting to the real contingencies of these things. And this book also tells you that socialism needs to also that socialist revolution needs to take on a character of destroying the characterization of racism. So yeah,
yeah.
it doesn't say not to, it says to, that we need to incorporate it.
Yes. I also like how it points that we need to step away from the Manichaeanism, no
Black and white, right?
matter, yeah, it how it states that that while it's a reaction, uh, it does harm when when a political movement starts to gain like traction and power, it reinforces what is what is stated to be what is fighting against.
Exactly that. Exactly that. But but now we need to do something. We have to if we want any of this to be rectified, we need to start engaging in a people's protracted war for liberation and to overthrow and to build. We need dual power. We need to build our dual power, organize amongst the revolutionary classes, and start. I understand that there's a seen and unseen revolutionary. There's the illegal, the illegal revolution. So, other than that, everybody, if you can, reach out to other groups. Start organizing amongst your groups. Even if you're bedridden, start organizing. You can do that. Like Joe organizes with people here, inside their bedroom. So it can be done, and like we'll be stronger when we reach out to those communities and actually organize and be as one, because we're much stronger, and we're much dangerous when we're all together fighting for the same thing in the liberation process.
Yeah, because organizing doesn't just mean everyone's doing the same thing. We do what we can because what we can do does something.
Yeah.
And we need something to happen. So that way everyone else can do something just that much easier.
All right, then. If no one else has anything to say, I'm gonna go ahead and close it out. Do you have anything before I close it?
Just much love. Take care.
All right, good. All right, everybody. Have a good night. As soon as I can, there it is.